and welcome to the very first Fraud Focus, Uncovering the Hidden Crime. And this is an opportunity for us to have some time, some video casts and podcasts talking about fraud and economic crime. This has been created in partnership with GovNet Communications and the government's counter-fraud function. And I'm really looking forward to exploring and listening and learning from some of the leading experts in the field about fraud, how we counter it, wider economic crime, which is such a big issue and challenge for our society at the moment. First up today, we have for the first episode, we're starting high. We're starting right at the peak. The bar is going to be very difficult for people to vault over because we're starting with Mike Haley. And I have to say, I'm going to let Mike introduce himself, but Mike is someone who I've been aware of and have seen working for a number of years. I've been working in counter fraud, and he has taught me so much. I've learned so much from watching him and seeing both how he conducts himself and what he says about how we deal with fraud and economic crime. So I think we're going to get some really great insights today. I'm really looking forward to it. Mike, shall I hand over to you just to give a brief intro on yourself, who you are and where you come from?
Thank you, Mark. Very, very flattering. I think whenever you've been in an industry for quite a long time, you don't recognize if you become an expert. Suddenly someone says you're an expert. But I have been working in counter fraud for nearly 30 years now. I started off as a customs officer. I don't know if people knew that, but as a customs officer in Northwest London, my first job after university, and I quite quickly gravitated towards the investigation service. And it was an absolutely fabulous grounding in criminal and civil investigation, and just the training, but you get the experience of investigations, of surveillance, of taking cases to court, giving evidence, the full panoply of skills you need. And I took that into then housing benefit fraud, NHS fraud, and it was at the NHS perhaps that I moved into a more strategic role. So I think before that was leading fraud investigation teams, but that took me beyond investigation to look at kind of a holistic approach to tackling fraud, looking at what did you learn from the investigation that you could stop a change in terms of processes, how you could start to prevent fraud, how you can invest in counter fraud awareness and cultural change in an organization and get staff on board to detect fraud. So that was a really big step for me in terms of from an investigator to a strategic role. And then I took that into the Office of Fair Trading, where I am really proud of starting up the mass marketing scams team to combat the worst types of consumer fraud, which weren't really seen as fraud now. But now we talk about them as authorized push payment fraud. We're trying to move off that language of scams, but the types of fraud which are really directed at individuals. And from there, I was recruited to go to the National Fraud Authority, which was a really fantastic opportunity at a nationwide level. Like yourself, Mark, having a role on a national level, trying to take the agenda forward. And then eventually, now I'm the CEO at CIFAS, the UK's fraud prevention service.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. I mean, so many areas touched on there, Mike. And I just want one thing. I'm going to jump straight into talking about fraud, which is terrible. But you said about scams and changing the language of scams, which is so important because scam is it sounds like a bit of a naughty word, doesn't it? Like, oh, they've done a scam rather than they have committed a crime. They're committing a crime. They're trying to steal off people. I think that maybe we'll touch on it later, but the language of fraud is so important, isn't it? And how we frame what this is and the gravity of it as well.